You wrote a very moving article in the Washington Post recently in honor of Asian American Pacific Islander Month, in which you talked about the need or the reason that we should have a museum honoring that culture on the National Mall. Explain why you feel that.
Well, as I mentioned, I'm an immigrant to this country. My parents left China during the height of the Civil War in 1949. They relocated to a small island, which is now very much in the press, called Taiwan. And my father took a national examination. He scored #1, broke all the records, and had the chance to come to America. He was also one of the youngest sea captains of his time at the age of 29. For a young couple who has never seen white people or any Americans, it was a tremendous vote of faith in the opportunities that this country provided. So my father went first. He was alone in America for 3 years, leaving behind his pregnant wife and 2 young children. So we didn't come to America until 3 years later. We arrived in a boat. It took 37 days on the seas, and we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment when we first came to America. And then as our situation got better, we moved to Long Island and then to Westchester County. And our story is one of millions that mark the American journey. And being Asian American, I've been, like most Americans, have been very, very concerned about the increase in violence and antipathy and hatred against the Asian American community. The Asian American story is the American story, among one of many, many threads. And I was thinking about how best to combat this rise in anti-Asian sentiments. And so what better solution would there be but to have a museum that's dedicated to the contributions, the achievements of the Asian American community. And that's how the idea arose. And I think it actually has great currency. I want to give voice to the fears of this community. There are a lot of people who are really concerned about the increase in hatred and sentiments against Asian Americans. It's fueled by what happened at COVID. Everyone suffered during COVID, but especially this population, this community, because so many Asian Americans own their own businesses. So from an unemployment rate of 2.4% pre-COVID, the unemployment rate jumped to over 14%. And on top of that came heaps of abuse and anger and anti-Asian sentiments.
What do you think of the causes of that? We've seen COVID, as you said, and it was labeled by the president then to be a China flu. That's one reason. Are there other reasons you think this is happening?
I think that's one reason. And I also think the increasing tensions between the U.S.-China relations is another. You know, a lot of people can't tell the difference between the Asian American groups. And in fact, the Asian American community is comprised of people from 80 different countries with very, very different backgrounds. But to many people, they really can't differentiate one group versus another. And so this increasing tensions between the U.S.-China relations is spilling over to all Asian American groups, and with obviously very great concern within the community and I think outside the community as well.
You talk about the need for a cultural museum for Asian Americans as part of the Smithsonian.
Well, history and culture, both.
History and Culture Museum as part of the Smithsonian on the Mall. What elements of the history and culture would you like to see highlighted?
Well, how many people, for example, know that Asian Americans fought in the Revolutionary War? How many people know that Asian Americans actually were present during the Civil War as well? How many people know that the Transcontinental Railroad, which was a great uniter of East and West coasts in America, that gave rise to this economic powerhouse that we are today? Well, those are done by Asian Americans. There were 15,000 Chinese Americans primarily who built the Transcontinental Railroad, going from California through the tough, hard Sierra Madre Mountains across the plains and connecting with the railroad tracks that were coming from the east. And over 1,000 Chinese railroad workers died and they were not even allowed to become U.S. citizens. And then, of course, we all know, most of us, I think, should know about the Japanese American incarceration in the internment camps. And yet, how many people knew that Japanese Americans fought valiantly in the European theater to protect freedom in their homeland when their relatives and loved ones were being interned? So there's a lot to know. And even now, we have so many, Asian Americans who are contributing to the vitality of our economy. So look at Silicon Valley. We've got Asian Americans who are spearheading the drive to innovation, to transformation in America and around the world. Now, this is a community that doesn't talk very much, that doesn't they're kind of quiet, they're reserved. But the FBI statistics on how many Asian Americans have been targeted and the increase in hate crimes are stunning. In the 1 year alone, since COVID, there was an increase of 77% in anti-Asian hate crimes. And the second year, that jumped to 167% increase. And in the third year, we saw increases of over 3 times the level of anti-Asian crimes, hatred, prior to COVID. So, and I'm sure those statistics are actually understated, because once again, this is not a community that speaks out very much.
Two of the most shameful periods of American history were the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1880s, and then, of course, the Japanese internment in World War II. To what extent do those two events still impact the psyche of the Asian American community?
The Chinese Exclusion Act of the 1890s was not the only piece of legislation that barred Chinese Americans from full participation in America, in American life. There were legislation stemming back to the late 1700s and throughout the 1800s. I think and of course, there are other instances of great injustice to other groups within our country as well. But I think what is really important to remember is that we're a young country that is full of hope and promise and a willingness to admit our errors, and that we have a great capacity to change, to transform, and to learn from our mistakes.
You talk about the contributions of Asian Americans and Asian immigrants, especially in Silicon Valley and the technology industry. What should we be doing on immigration? It seems like we're clamping down to some extent on visas and immigration. Should we be opening it up more?
This is a huge issue that when President Obama had the complete control of the government, meaning the executive branch, the House, and the Senate, even he could not come to any resolution of this particular issue. I think Republicans believe in legal migration, and so they are more in favor of a guest worker program, whereas Democrats would want amnesty, and they would not like a guest worker program. But with our economy as lacking and needing workers as we do today, I mean, there are 11 million vacant jobs in America today. And the labor participation rate is quite low. When I was Secretary of Labor, the average labor participation rate was 66.4% in a working population of about 157 million people. Now, that labor participation rate is only 62.3% post-COVID, against about the same population, but of course it's grown in the last 3 years. So we're missing about 6 to 7 million workers. And so we need skilled workers as well. We need STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math experts. And most of the time, they are exported basically from abroad. So there are a lot of issues within the immigration field that needs addressing.
Well, wait, so do you think we should just staple a visa on anybody who gets a good STEM education from the United States?
That's exactly what Senator Bennett of Utah used to say, the late Senator Bennett. And we certainly need more STEM students. And we also need to encourage our children, our grandchildren, our students here who are native born to go more into the STEM, in the STEM fields, including more young girls to go into the STEM fields. It has a lot of promise. It's it's got lots of potential in terms of job opportunities for the future. So we need to do both. We need to allow more immigration, and this is an area, again, of great discussion and disagreement of these more skilled workers, but also we need to somehow invest and make more interesting to our own young people who are native born to study the STEMs fields.
Help me make sense of the labor participation rate these days after COVID, how the nature of work is changing, and what seems, to me at least, to be a very low unemployment rate.
Well, the first Friday of every month comes the unemployment numbers. And they're held in great secrecy, so it's at precisely 8:30 in the morning. I remember that. What we're seeing now is that after the Great Recession, there was a drop-off of workers, some who left because of lack of opportunity, some who retired. And ever since then, we have not seen these workers come back. And it could be, again, through competition with government compensation programs. I mean, the largesse of the federal government in the last few years, some was justified. I mean, clearly, in March of 2020, the CARES Act was necessary because our economy was in such bad shape that the federal government basically funded through the employers the payrolls they had to maintain to keep workers, employed.
But that's been phased out now, and
yes,
we actually seem to have really high employment, don't we?
And then subsequent
the economy
to that,
seems pretty good.
Yeah, so subsequent to that, there were also very large government injections into the economy. So the federal government became a competitor with the private sector in terms of compensation. And many of these workers are making very rational choices as to why they're staying out of the workforce. We're also seeing an increase in disability. So that is also a very, it's certainly a program that is needed by those who need it, but that has also taken workers out of the workforce. So what we're really concerned now is whether this low unemployment rate, this low labor participation rate is permanent. And we need to get more people back into the workforce because it is vital for our economic recovery. And the unemployment rate, as you mentioned, it just came out in June 2nd, it was June 1st or 2nd. It's 3.7%. It's below full employment. So every employer in every field is so anxious to be able to hire the workers that they need. And not having the workers available is affecting the supply chain and our ability to provide services and keep the economy going in a robust condition.
In your Washington Post essay, and we've discussed it a little bit tonight, you talk about a fear that we might return to internment camps, a fear within the Asian American community. That's pretty startling. Where do you sense that, and can you expand on that?
I don't have to sense it. I hear it. I hear it among the community. You know, I still go to events. I have friends. I'm part of the community. I mean, these are fears. That's why I say I want to give voice to them, because this is a community that hitherto has been really hardworking. They don't speak up. They don't complain very much. And given the level of hatred and violence directed against this community, they're fearful that such an unbelievable occurrence, possibility may exist. 75% of Chinese Americans have felt the sting and very often the physical attack of anti-Asian hatred. They've been spat upon. They have been cursed at just walking in the streets of New York City. So this is not something made up. These are people that are just going about their ordinary business. They're commuting, and then somebody spits on them, or someone tells them to go home. Well, America is their home.
Secretary Elaine Chao, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. They're great patriots, and I want to emphasize that as well.